The winter wind cut through Main Street as Jacob Harrison hurried his 7-year-old daughter Emma past the holiday market stalls. Christmas was in 3 days, and he still had shopping to finish before his shift at the construction site. Single fatherhood meant every minute counted, every dollar stretched thin. "Daddy, look!" Emma tugged his hand, stopping abruptly. Jacob followed her gaze to a woman sitting on a bench at the edge of the market. She was large, bundled in layers of worn sweaters and a green shawl, her cheeks red from cold. In her lap sat 3 handmade Ragdolls, cheerful things with yarn hair in orange, rainbow, and brown, wearing mismatched dresses, sewn from what looked like old fabric scraps. The woman's expression was vacant, staring at nothing, as shoppers bustled past without a glance. A small cardboard sign propped against her basket read, "Handmade dolls, $5 each. Please help." "She looks so sad," Emma whispered. "And it's so cold, Daddy." Jacob felt the familiar tug of empathy warring with practicality. They had $40 left for the week. Groceries, gas, Emma's school supplies. He couldn't afford to spare $5 on a doll Emma didn't need, let alone help a stranger. "Come on, sweetheart, we need to—" "But Daddy, she's all alone. And it's almost Christmas." Emma's eyes, so much like her mother's, were filling with tears. What if nobody buys her dolls? What if she doesn't have anyone? Jacob looked at the woman again. Really looked. Her clothes were clean but ancient. Her hands clutching the dolls were chapped and red. And despite the crowds and music and holiday cheer surrounding her, she seemed utterly isolated. An island of loneliness in a sea of celebration. "Please, Daddy," Emma said quietly. "Can we bring her home for Christmas?" The question stunned him. "Emma, we can't not forever, just for Christmas dinner, so she's not alone." Emma's voice carried the absolute certainty only children possess about right and wrong. "Mommy always said Christmas was for making sure nobody was left out, remember?" Jacob's throat tightened. His wife Sarah had died 2 years ago from cancer, but her compassion lived on in their daughter. Sarah would have absolutely invited a lonely stranger home for Christmas. Practical concerns be damned. "Let's start by buying a doll," Jacob said, approaching the woman. "And then we'll see." The woman looked up as they approached, and Jacob saw eyes that had once been bright, but were now dulled by grief and isolation. "Hello," Jacob said gently. "My daughter would like to buy a doll." Emma pointed to the one with rainbow yarn hair. "That one, please. She's beautiful." For the first time, the woman's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise, then gratitude. "Thank you," she said in a voice rough from disuse. "Her name is Rainbow. I make them all myself. They're wonderful." Jacob handed over a $5 bill, knowing he'd have to stretch the remaining 35 for the week. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Margaret." "Margaret Chen." She handed Emma the doll with careful reverence. "I hope Rainbow brings you joy." Emma hugged the doll, then looked up at Margaret with that direct, honest gaze children have. "Are you alone for Christmas?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I am. "Would you like to come to our house for Christmas dinner?" Emma asked before Jacob could stop her. "We don't have much, but Daddy makes really good turkey. Well, it's a small turkey, more like a big chicken. But it's good. And we have mashed potatoes and pie." Margaret looked at Jacob, clearly expecting him to retract the invitation, to explain that his daughter didn't understand social boundaries. Instead, Jacob found himself saying, "We'd be honored if you'd join us. Christmas Eve dinner, tomorrow at 6, if you're comfortable with that. I couldn't impose—" "You're not imposing, you're accepting an invitation." Jacob pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'll text you our address." Margaret stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. We'd like to," Emma said simply. "Nobody should be alone on Christmas. That's what Mommy always said." Margaret's hands trembled as she fumbled for her ancient flip phone and recited her number. Jacob sent her their address, adding, "Dinner at 6 p.m. tomorrow. No need to bring anything, just yourself." That evening, Emma chattered excitedly about Margaret coming for dinner, while Jacob did mental math about stretching their grocery budget. He'd have to make the small turkey work, add more vegetables to bulk out the meal, skip the fancy dessert he'd planned. "Daddy, Why was Margaret sitting outside all alone? Emma asked as he tucked her in. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she doesn't have family nearby. Or maybe something happened that made her sad and lonely, like when Mommy died? Jacob's heart clenched. Maybe something like that, yes. Then I'm really glad we invited her, because I remember how sad and lonely we were, and how it hurts so much. I don't want anyone to feel like that, especially on Christmas. Jacob kissed her forehead, marveling at the capacity for empathy in his daughter's small heart. You have your mother's kindness, Emma. She'd be so proud of you. The next day, Christmas Eve, Jacob worked frantically to prepare. He'd swung by the market hoping to find Margaret and confirm she was coming, but her bench had been empty. He texted her twice, receiving no response, and wondered if she'd changed her mind. At 5:30 p.m., as Jacob was setting the table and Emma was arranging her new rainbow doll as a centerpiece, the doorbell rang. Margaret stood on the porch, and Jacob barely recognized her. She'd clearly made an effort. Her hair was neatly braided, her clothes were clean, if worn, and she carried a covered dish with shaking hands. I know you said not to bring anything, Margaret said quickly, but I made sweet potato casserole. It's not much, but I couldn't come empty-handed. That's very kind. Please, come in. The evening that followed was unlike anything Jacob had expected. Margaret was quiet at first, almost painfully shy, but Emma's enthusiastic questions gradually drew her out. They learned that Margaret had been an elementary school teacher for 30 years before retiring. That she'd been married to her husband Tom for 42 years before he died of a heart attack 18 months ago. That they'd never had children, something they'd grieved deeply, but had poured their love into their students and their community. After Tom died, everything fell apart, Margaret said quietly, her eyes on her plate. I couldn't afford to keep our house on just my pension. Tom's medical bills had eaten our savings. I had to sell everything, moved into a tiny efficiency apartment. And I realized I had no one. We'd been each other's whole world for so long we'd lost touch with friends. I had no family, just emptiness. Emma reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. You have us now. Margaret's face crumpled. She covered her mouth, crying silently, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry. No one's been kind to me in so long. No one's seen me. I sit at that market every day trying to sell dolls to make a little extra money, and people look right through me, like I'm invisible, like I don't matter because I'm old and fat and alone. You matter, Emma said fiercely. You matter a lot. Your dolls are beautiful, and you're nice, and I'm really glad you came to our house. Jacob felt his own eyes burning. Emma's right. You're welcome here, Margaret. Always. After dinner, they sat around the small Christmas tree, a scraggly thing from the discount lot, but Emma had decorated, with homemade ornaments, and it felt perfect. Margaret told them about teaching first grade, about the students she'd loved, about traditions she and Tom had shared. We used to make dolls together, she said, touching Rainbow gently. For children who couldn't afford toys. We'd collect fabric scraps and make dozens of dolls each year, then donate them to shelters and hospitals. After Tom died, I kept making them. It was the only thing that made me feel connected to him, but sitting alone, selling them in the cold, I wondered if I should just give up. Don't give up, Emma said. Your dolls make people happy. Rainbow makes me so happy. Margaret smiled through tears. You make me happy, sweet girl. Both of you. You reminded me that kindness still exists, that people still see each other. That night, after Margaret had gone home with promises to return soon, Jacob found Emma in bed clutching Rainbow. Daddy, Margaret's like us, isn't she? Missing someone who died? Yes, sweetheart, she is. Then we should be her family now, because she doesn't have one, and we have extra room in ours, right? Jacob thought about their small house, their tight budget, their quiet life, and he thought about the laughter at dinner, the joy in Emma's eyes, the way Margaret had looked when Emma had called her Grandma Margaret, and Margaret had burst into happy tears. Right. Jacob agreed. We have room. Margaret became a fixture in their lives. She babysat Emma after school, teaching her to sew and make dolls. She shared meals with them several times a week, slowly filling the grandmother-shaped hole in Emma's life and the mother-shaped void Jacob hadn't realized he'd been carrying since his own mother died years ago. Jacob helped Margaret set up a small online store for her dolls, which quickly gained a following. Grandma Margaret's memory dolls became known for their quality and the handwritten notes Margaret included with each one, explaining that every doll was made with love in memory of her late husband. Orders poured in. Margaret went from barely surviving on her pension to having steady income from her craft. She moved to a better apartment, started attending church again, reconnected with old friends who drifted away during her isolation. "You saved my life," Margaret told Jacob one evening 6 months after that first Christmas. "Both of you. I was disappearing, becoming invisible, ready to give up. You saved ours too," Jacob said honestly. "Emma needed a grandmother. I needed family. We needed to remember that opening your home, opening your heart, that's what makes life worth living." Emma, now 8, ran over with a new doll she'd helped Margaret create. "Look, Daddy, we made this one together. Her name is Sarah, after Mommy." The doll had blonde yarn hair and a smile stitched with care. Margaret had helped Emma create it as a way to honor Sarah's memory, to keep her present in their lives. "Your mommy would be so proud of you," Margaret said, hugging Emma, "for having such a big heart, for seeing someone who needed help and refusing to walk past. That's a gift, sweet girl. Never lose it." 2 years after that first Christmas, Margaret stood beside Jacob at Emma's school play, beaming with grandmotherly pride. They'd become family in every way that mattered. Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, Emma calling her Grandma Margaret without hesitation. "Remember when I asked if we could bring you home for Christmas?" Emma said after the play, hugging Margaret. "I remember thinking your father would say no," Margaret admitted. "That I was just a fat old widow sitting on a bench, and why would anyone want me at their table? Because you looked lonely," Emma said. "And because Mommy taught us that Christmas isn't about what you have, it's about making room for people who need room." Jacob watched his daughter, now 10, with Margaret, their heads bent together over a new doll design, and marveled at how one impulsive invitation had transformed all their lives. The obese widow holding Ragdolls had become the beloved grandmother neither of them had known they needed. And the single father who could barely afford to buy one $5 doll had discovered that the greatest gifts don't come from stores. They come from opening your door to someone who's been left out in the cold. Emma had asked, "Can we bring her home for Christmas, Daddy?" And in bringing Margaret home, they'd all finally come home themselves, to family, to love, to the understanding that the holiday isn't about perfect tables and expensive presents. It's about seeing someone the world has made invisible and saying, "You matter. You belong. You're part of us now." That's the gift that lasts long after the decorations come down and the snow melts. The gift of family you choose. The gift of love given freely. The gift of a 7-year-old girl who looked at a lonely stranger and saw not an inconvenience or a charity case, but a grandmother waiting to be found.